بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الذي به تحصل المعاملة المرضية.
So this fundamental concern of the Ihyas, which is merging and combining the outer and the inner, the practical, the empirical and the spiritual in all of our actions and dealings, and restoring the practice of the deen as a holistic practice which is which addresses the spiritual and the inner elements as much as it does the outer elements. This is a concern which the Muslims of today are in as much need of as the Muslims of the time of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali were, if not even more. Because today we live in a time when not only do we have to contend with a divergence between the ranks of those who are over-engrossed with practicals and externals and physical do's and don'ts, and those who are fully immersed in the spiritual realm and are unconcerned with the rules and the laws of the Sharia. We also have a third and a greater thread, which is the drive towards the secularization of Muslim peoples and Muslim lands, which is to separate completely our deen and our religious identity from our lives, so that religion becomes at best an individual concern, but with no real bearing or impact on a person's life. And people say that religious teachings and religious exhortations are really the refuge of the weak. If you're strong, you don't need religion. You don't need to be exhorted by your faith towards this or that action. The intellect and the empirical tools suffice. So that is a greater threat. And what the Muslims are in much need of today, and also not just the Muslims but the non-Muslim world, which is either preoccupied with presenting Islam as a fundamentalist and extremist tradition which has no mercy, which is all about terrorism, and it has no justice, it has no decorum, it has no etiquette, it has no positive contributions for humanity. Either people are presenting Islam in this way, or Islam is being presented to them in this way, and they accept that because of a lack of anything else coming from anything contrary to that being demonstrated by Muslims. In other words, the greatest rebuttal of both the secularization, the attempts for secularizing the deen, and for presenting the deen as an extremist and fanatical tradition, is to merge within ourselves an all-embracing appreciation of our religion, which is both practical and spiritual, which is both inwardly and outwardly, and therefore we have much need of these sciences today.
أبو حامد الغزالي جعل العلم أول كتاب في الإحياء، وسيطبق عليه هذه النظرية، نظرية علم المعاملة، لأن العلم في فهم إمامنا رحمه الله هو من العبادات. قلنا إحياء مقسم إلى عبادات وعادات ومهلكات ومنجيات، فالعلم أول العبادات. فالعلم غير العلم الذي كنا نتكلم عنه فيما سبق. الآن العلم الذي هو حركة التحصيل، أنك تسعى لتنتفع وتستفيد وتبتعد عن الجهل، هذا عبادة، بل هو أول العبادات، مقدم على الصلاة، مقدم على الزكاة، مقدم على الصوم، مقدم على الحج. وهذا العلم فضيلته ناشئة من تعلقه، فالعلم بالله هو أعظم العلوم. العلم بالله تبارك وتعالى بصفاته، بأسمائه، بأفعاله سبحانه وتعالى، بما يجب له، بما يستحيل له، بما يجوز له سبحانه وتعالى. هذا أعظم العلوم، ومن يجهله لا يكون مهتديا. ومن علمه وجبت له منزلة خاصة. جاءت النصوص ببيان هذه المنزلة، ويكفي في ذلك قوله تعالى: إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء. وقوله تعالى: أمن هو قانت آناء الليل قائما وساجدا يحذر الآخرة ويرجو رحمة ربه قل هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون. وكأنه يقول لنا سبحانه وتعالى: إن العالم هو الذي يحذر الآخرة ويرجو رحمة ربه قائما آناء الليل ساجدا يتعبد الله سبحانه وتعالى. فهذه الآية تبين من هم العلماء ومن ليسوا علماء. فمن يقضي ليله في سبات طويل لا يعرف الوقوف بين يدي الله، ولا يعرف العبادات ونوافل الخير، ولا يكون من العلماء وإن حفظ المتون ودرس الكتب المطولة.
So Imam al-Ghazali then proceeds with the Book of Knowledge as the first book in Ihyaa Al-Uloom Al-Deen. And his unique approach is again to a dealing of the subject of knowledge, but from this holistic perspective, which is not just outward and not just inner. In other words, from the angle of ilm al-mu'amala. And therefore, knowledge, according to Imam al-Ghazali, is an act of ibadah. This isn't simply the act of knowing, which, when we spoke previously, we spoke of the sciences of the deen, and that there are sciences pertaining to the outer, sciences to the inner. Here, when we speak of knowledge in Kitab al-Ilm, what al-Ghazali is speaking of is the driving force or the motivating factor to increasing in one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and on one's journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of the four types that the book has been divided into, the ibadat, acts of worship, the aadat, the habitual actions, the muhlikat, the destructive, and the munjiyat, the salvaging attributes. Knowledge is considered amongst the ibadat because knowledge is that which leads you to carrying out your duties, and therefore it comes before the duties of salah, of fasting, of hajj, etc. Knowledge has to precede all of these things, so it has a rank before all of these things. And the status or the excellence of knowledge is related, directly related to the subject matter of knowledge. So knowledge concerning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest and most noble of all sciences. To have knowledge, to acquire knowledge of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, what the qualities and attributes and characteristics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are, what the practice or the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, what His power and His ability and His knowledge and His presence extends to, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what type of things are impermissible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in those impermissible of us to conceive that such a thing could be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These, all of the things that relate to Allah, knowledge of that is the most honored and noble of all of the sciences, and anyone who is derived of this knowledge cannot be on guidance. To not know your Creator and yet carry out acts of worship is really not to be on proper guidance. And one who acquires this knowledge has acquired a special position of being aware and conscious of his Creator, and the texts of the Quran and the Sunnah mention this in great abundance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. It is only those endowed with knowledge that fear Allah amongst His servants. Truly, to fear Allah, it's only the people who know Him that can really fear Him. And another verse of the Quran in which Allah says, and the one who is fearful of his Creator and worships Him and spends the hours of night prostrate before Him, can they that know and they that do not know ever be equal? And in this, Allah indicates that by they that know is meant the people who, they are the people who spend their days and their nights committed to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are fearful of Him, who spend the latter parts of the night in prostration before Him, who yearn for Him. And so to simply have knowledge of books and simply have knowledge of texts, an academic knowledge, which hasn't driven one to increase in action, in coming near to Allah through worship, in yearning for Him, and in desiring closeness with Him. That is not the knowledge that's being discussed here. We're talking of knowledge, or Imam Al-Ghazali considers knowledge from the holistic view that he's set to discuss all of these issues, as true knowledge is only that which drives one towards greater awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Particular paragraphs from the Ihya, and if you'd like to follow that, he'll be reading from page 36 of the notes that you have in front of you. Page 36, beginning from the fourth line from the bottom of the first paragraph. Fourth line up from the bottom of the first paragraph on page 36 marks where he will begin this reading from.
Type out the text start, do the first line of in English.
Sorry, and these are the words: the pious among the learned men, the pious among the learned men. Sentence.
Everybody found it?
This is where we are. The pious among the learned men. Fourth line up from the first paragraph on page 36.
Everybody found that? You guys want to have it here?
وقد كان أهل الورع من علماء الظاهر مقرين بفضل علماء الباطن وأرباب القلوب. إذن الإمام أبو حامد الغزالي رحمه الله يمضي في بيان التوفيق بين علماء الظاهر وعلماء الباطن، أن كلا انتفع بالآخر، وأن هذا الدين لا يقوم إلا على علماء الظاهر والباطن معا، فلا فصل بين هاتين الطائفتين، وإن إحياء علوم الدين يكون بإحياء التعاون بين هذين الاختصاصين، بأن يمزجا ويقدما في علم واحد كما قلنا هو علم المعاملة. وعلماء الظاهر الذين انتفعوا ونفع الله بهم إنما كانوا على صلة قرب من علماء الباطن، وعلماء الباطن الذين انتفعوا ونفع الله بهم إنما كانوا على صلة قرب أيضا بعلماء الظاهر، فحين تكامل حصل النفع بهم جميعا. فأبو حامد الغزالي رحمه الله يقول: نسأل الله أن ينفعنا بعلمه. وقد كان أهل الورع من علماء الظاهر مقرين بفضل علماء الباطن وأرباب القلوب. كان الإمام الشافعي رضي الله عنه يجلس بين يدي شيبان الراعي كما يقعد الصبي في المكتب، ويسأله كيف يفعل في كذا وكذا، فيقال له مثلك يسأل هذا البدوي فيقول إن هذا وفق لما أغفلناه. إذن تواضع الشافعي ومعرفته بمراتب العلوم ودرجات أهل العلم هو الذي جعله ينطق بهذا الكلام. فإن شيبان الراعي كان من أعلم أهل زمانه بأدواء القلوب وأدويتها، بعلل النفوس وطرق إصلاحها، وهذا علم غاية في الندرة وقلة من يفقهه ويحسن التصرف فيه. فالشافعي يعرف قدر نفسه في ورسوخ قدمه في الفقه والأصول والعربية والحديث، وما كان ليتبع شيبان الراعي في هذه العلوم، ولكن في علم إصلاح القلوب ومداواة النفوس يعرف أن شيبان الراعي كان أعلم منه بهذا الميدان، ومن هنا جاء إقراره بفضله، فرحم الله الجميع. كما أن شيبان لا شك عندي أنه كان يعرف قدر الشافعي في الفقه والأصول والعربية والحديث ولا يجاوزه في هذه الميادين، رحم الله أئمتنا. وكان أحمد بن حنبل رضي الله عنه ويحيى بن معين، وهم يعني من أئمة الجرح والتعديل والحديث أيضا، يختلفان إلى معروف الكرخي، ولم يكن في علم الظاهر بمنزلتهما، يعني كانوا أكثر رسوخا في الفقه والحديث والتفسير وما إلى ذلك من معروف الكرخي، ولكنه كان أرسخ في علم القلوب منهما، فكانوا ينتفعون به وكان يسألان. وكيف وقد قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لما قيل له كيف نفعل إذا جاءنا أمر لم نجده في كتاب الله ولا سنة، فقال عليه الصلاة والسلام سلوا الصالحين واجعلوه شورى بينهم. المعنى الحديث لا شك أنه صحيح، ولكن هذا اللفظ ليس صحيحا عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. ونجد مثل هذا في كتاب إحياء علوم الدين، وهذا مما أخذ على الإمام الحجة رحمه الله. ومن ذا الذي ترضى سجاياه كلها كفى المرء نبلا أن تعد معايب. فهذا من نقائص الإحياء، وقد كمل العلماء الذين جاءوا من بعده هذا النقص، فدرسوا الأحاديث وخرجوها وتكلموا فيها بالتصحيح والتضعيف، وأبرزهم الحافظ العراقي في مغنيه الذي أغنى به طلبة العلم عن الحيرة في تصحيح الأحاديث.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So on page 36, then first paragraph, starting from the fourth line from the bottom of the first paragraph. The pious men amongst the learned in exoteric knowledge, outer knowledge, used to acknowledge the excellence of the learned men in esoteric knowledge, or ilm al-batin, that should say ilm al-batin, and the advocates of the inward knowledge of the heart. And so in bygone days, the learned people of both of these disciplines, the outward and the inward, had a very advanced degree of respect and cooperation, mutual sharing and conviviality, in that the scholars of the outer sciences would refer to and recognize the importance of the scholars of the inward and vice versa. And this has been the way from the beginning, Imam al-Ghazali tells us. And then to cite an example or a few examples, he goes on to tell us Imam al-Shafi'i was in the habit of sitting before Shayban al-Ra'i, just as a boy would sit in the school. In other words, al-Shafi'i, the great Imam, the great scholar, the great mujtahid, would go and sit respectfully in the presence of Shayban al-Ra'i, who wasn't an acknowledged scholar in any of the academic sciences. He wasn't a scholar of hadith or of fiqh or of ijtihad, but a person of great learning, great inner learning, and would ask him questions concerning one thing or another. And it says here to which Shayban would reply, but in the original I think it says sometimes Ash-Shafi'i would be questioned, why do you ask the advice of this Bedouin? Why do you go to this Bedouin, being the great Imam that you are? And Ash-Shafi'i would reply, because he disagrees with what we already know. In the original, this person has been guided towards certain things which we have been negligent of. And this was the state of... Now, Imam Shafi'i was an Imam in Hadith and an Imam in Arabic language, an Imam in the principles of Ijtihad and all of these type of things. So he's going to Shayban al-Ra'i wasn't to go and learn any of these sciences or disciplines from him. Indeed, the Shaykh says, I have no doubt in my mind that Shayban al-Ra'i, this Sufi master or this spiritual master, in matters of fiqh and ijtihad, would submit to a Shafi'i and would not would acknowledge his status and his rank in these exoteric disciplines. However, a Shafi'i would go to him because he considered his spiritual state and his knowledge related to the rectification of the inner self, the heart, to be at a very advanced stage, and so he'd go to him with all humility. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Yahya ibn Ma'in, both of whom are imams in the sciences of hadith, of jarh and ta'deel, the critiquing of narrators of hadith, and of course imams in ijtihad and fiqh as well, would call upon Ma'ruf al-Karhi, who in exterior knowledge, ilm al-Zahir, was not their equal. Ma'ruf al-Karhi was not somebody who in exterior, in exoteric knowledge, could be considered the equal of either Ahmad or Yahya, but they'd go to him, and then the scholars, Al-Ghazali writes, and why should they not have done so, when the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, and here in the original Arabic, I think the hadith that's being cited is slightly different, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, "Salu salihin waj'alu shura bainakum." Ask the righteous. The hadith that Al-Ghazali refers to here is ask the righteous and make it consultation between them. In other words, the righteous, you should refer to the people of rectitude with your questions and listen to their deliberations amongst themselves. The Ustad says this hadith, although sound in its meaning, is actually from an Isnad perspective not very well established, and this is one of the issues that many scholars have taken issue with against Imam Al-Ghazali, that a number of the ahadith that he relates in his Ihya aren't of particularly high standing in terms of the Isnad. And for that, he says, many of the latest scholars went through the ahadith and critiqued them, and often found alternative, more authentically related transmissions, but the meaning is sound. Then he says, the Shaykh said it's quoting a piece of poetry. There's no one whose deeds are all good. It's enough of an honor for a person, or enough as a distinction for one, that his faults should be enough. One should be able to enumerate his faults. In other words, if you have such few faults that one can count them, then that's distinction enough. But nobody is free of all of any mistakes. So this was the state of the scholars of the past, that they would refer to those who belonged to the inner disciplines, even though their status was not the same as theirs in the outer.
ولذلك قيل علماء الظاهر زينة الأرض والملك، وعلماء الباطن زينة السماء والملكوت. علماء الظاهر لن نقف كثيرا عند هذا الاصطلاح الذي بعض العلماء يرفضه. غاية ما في الأمر أن هذا التقسيم باعتبار الواقع لا باعتبار ما ينبغي، وهذا حاصل كلام أبي حامد الغزالي. يعني أبو حامد الغزالي رحمه الله كما قلنا هو يريد أن يوفق ويريد أن يجمعهم ويريد أن، لكن لم يغض الطرف عن الواقع الذي كان يلمسه، وهو أنه كان هناك علماء ظاهر حقا وكان هناك علماء باطن حقا. يعني ناس همهم كيف يصلحون أنفسهم، وما كانوا مختصين لا بالفقه ولا بالحديث ولا بالتفسير وآخرون كان شغلهم الشاغل هو معرفة الفقه وفروعه، فيتقنون أبواب اللعان والطلاق والنكاح وفقه هذه المسائل، ولكن ما كان لهم علم بمسائل النفوس. هذا هو الواقع. فحين يقول علماء الظاهر أو علماء الباطن باعتبار الواقع لا باعتبار أنه يريد أن يفصل بينهم. فمن اعترض على الغزالي رحمه الله في هذا التقسيم وفي هذا الاستخدام، إنما يعترض على شيء لا محل له في ذهن أبي حامد الغزالي، وإنما هو يعترض على شيء هو واقع في الحياة. فلنتنبه إلى هذا. وهؤلاء علماء الظاهر يقول هم زينة الأرض والملك، أي إن الحياة الدنيوية لا يمكن أن تصلح إذا لم يكن فيها علماء يضبطون قوانينها، العلاقات الاجتماعية، العلاقات السياسية، العلاقات الاقتصادية، لا بد فيها من ضبط وتبيين الحقوق وما إلى ذلك. وإلا كيف؟ يعني أنت ما يمكن تأتي تقول والله يا أخي وأنا أحبك في الله وبعدين تأخذ له حقه، لا يجوز. فعلماء الظاهر هم الذين سيوقفون كلا عند حقه وعند واجبه، فهم زينة الأرض والملك. لا يستقيم الملك يعني والحكم والنظام في الحياة إلا بهذا، إلا بالقانون، وإلا يسير الناس كالحيوانات المتوحشة في الغابة. إذن لابد من هذا. وعلماء الباطن هم زينة السماء والملكوت. يعني إمام مالك رحمه الله له قولة عظيمة تدل على أن هذا المعنى كان يدركه مالك قبل أن يتسمى الناس بالظاهر والباطن أو بالصوفية أو بالفقهاء أو بما إلى ذلك. فقال: وجدت في مسجدكم هذا أو في أساطين مسجدكم هذا، يعني مسجد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، 70 ممن أرجو دعوتهم ولا أقبل روايتهم. يعني إذا يعني رأيتهم يعني التمس منهم الدعاء والتمس منهم الخير ولكن إذا قالوا قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قل له توقف، أنت لست من أهل الحفظ والدقة والإتقان في الحديث. ولهذا قالوا كل من روى عنه مالك فهو ثقة إلا عبد الكريم بن أبي المخارق، وكان من أهل الكوفة، قدم على المدينة وكان من الصالحين، ممن يعني فاق الناس في صلاحه، حتى يعني أخطأ مالك في الرواية عنه، وقالوا لم يروي عنه مع هذا إلا حديثا واحدا. ولهذا قالوا من روى عنه مالك فقد جاوز القنطرة، لا يبحث عنه لدقته في يعني قبول الرواة. فهذا يدل على أنه كان يراعي اختصاصات الناس، وأنه فيه من كان يعنى بشيء ولا يتقنه. ولهذا قالوا علماء الجرح والتعديل قالوا جل القراء من ضعفة الحديث. يعني القراء الكبار، حمزة الكوفي، حمزة الزيات، من أحد الأئمة القراء العشرة، وعاصم بن أبي النجود، ضعاف في الحديث، يعني أقوياء في القرآن، ولكن من أين جاء الضعف؟ لأنه كان تركيزهم على القرآن، وهذا التركيز جعلهم لا يهتمون كثيرا بالحديث، فضعف حفظهم له، فإذا رووا يخطئون، لكن في القرآن مستحيل. فكانوا ثقات وفي أعلى درجات الإتقان في القرآن، وكانوا إما متوسطين أو ضعافا في الحديث. فانظروا إلى أن هذا هو الواقع، ولا يمكن أن يجتمع إلا بقلة التمكن والرسوخ في ميادين مختلفة. فأهل الباطن هؤلاء هم زينة السماء، يعني أهل السماء الملأ العلوي، يعني يحبونهم ويباركونهم لأنهم شبههم متفرغون بين يعني شيء من النزاع يحتدم ويتطور إلى الوشايات وإلى يعني العقوبات في بعض الأحايين. أبو حامد الغزالي رحمه الله لا شك هو من كبار فقهاء الأمة، ويقر له الفقهاء بمكانته العلمية، كما أنه خالط وصاحب وعرف من قريب الصوفية. وذكرنا في نشأته أن والده كان صوفيا وإن كان أميا، وأن تربيته الأولى كانت من قبل هذا الرجل الصوفي الذي وصاه أبوه بأن يرعى أحمد ومحمد. إذن مشروعه التجديدي الإحيائي الذي تمثل في كتابه إحياء علوم الدين هو ثمر لهذه المعرفة الفقهية والصوفية في آن واحد، ومحاولة لجمع هاتين الطائفتين والتقريب فيما بينهما بأن يقدم المشترك ما بين الطائفتين، وهو ما يسميه علم المعاملة. ونشرح هذا من خلال التقسيم الكلي لكتابه إحياء علوم الدين، وكيف أنه بعنايته بعلم المعاملة قدم للأمة المشروع التجديدي الإحيائي الذي تجتمع فيه جهود الفقهاء مع جهود الصوفية.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. The Shaykh mentioned previously that Imam Al-Ghazali was born into a time of unrest and trepidation, and a time that was characterized by discord between two major factions of the Islamic heritage. The people of the Islamic sciences, academic Islamic sciences, the people of fiqh and the fuqaha on the one side, and those who were more concerned with spirituality and spiritual The Shaykh mentioned that Imam Al-Ghazali was born into a time of unrest and a time of discord between two of the major factions of the Islamic heritage. On the one hand, the fuqaha, or the people of the academic Islamic sciences, and the Sufis, or those who concern themselves more with spiritual development and spiritual matters. The Sufis would showed some disdain towards the fuqaha and considered them to be concerned only with the outer and the exterior states of people, without being sufficiently concerned with the inner states, and therefore that they weren't addressing the main objectives of the deen. Whereas on the other hand, the fuqaha considered many of the Sufis to go to extremes in their spiritual pursuits, to the extent that sometimes they considered them to be contradicting parts of the Sharia, and not paying enough attention to the detail of the law. So a problem between the spirit and the letter of the law. Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was, of course, from the greatest of the fuqaha, of outer learning, external knowledges related, sciences related to the fiqh the practical aspects of the deen, and many of the great scholars attest to that, have considered him amongst that. But at the same time, he was also a person who had intimate knowledge of and dealings with the people of spirituality, the Sufis. His father was himself a Sufi, but not an educated person, not somebody who'd had academic training, but a man given to piety and righteousness. And he'd left the person he'd entrusted to take care of Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, his brother, was similarly a man who was involved and concerned with the Sufi concerns. So that was his initial tarbiyah and upbringing, was along these lines. The Ihyaa Al-Uloom, Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's work on reviving the classical Islamic sciences, is really the fruit of this association between his having lived with and become intimately familiar with the concerns of the Sufis or the spiritual masters, and his attempts to try to bring together these concerns with the objectives of the fuqaha, or the scholars of the outer. And he did that through what he termed the mu'amala, or dealing with both of these. In other words, trying to bring a harmony between the inner and the outer in practice, in theory and in practice. And this represented a new initiative, a new academic and spiritual initiative to try to combine both of the disciplines of spirituality and outer practice into one whole, which Imam al-Ghazali presents to us in the Ihya.
إذن مشروعه يهدف إلى ربط علوم الصوفية بعلوم الفقهاء، وهذا المشروع الإحياء لأبي حامد الغزالي رحمه الله لا بد له من خطة. هذه الخطة يشرحها كتابه إحياء علوم الدين، الذي يحمل في عنوانه في هذا الاسم إحياء علوم الدين الهدف من هذا الكتاب. إذن هو يريد أن يحيي علوم الدين كلها دون إقصاء. فما هي هذه العلوم التي يريد أن يحييها؟ إذن سيحدد معناها ويشرحها، ويدخل علوما أقصيت. هناك علوم توصل اجتهاده فيها إلى أنها قد همشت أو أقصيت وتناساها الناس عبر العصور، فهو يعيد لها الاعتبار ويحرر مباحثها وما إلى ذلك. فهذا عمل ضخم يدل على مكانته الراسخة في العلم. فأول شيء بدأ به كتاب إحياء علوم الدين هو كتاب العلم قبل كتاب العقائد، وفي ذلك إشارة إلى أن الأصل الذي ينبني عليه هذا الإحياء وهذا الدين هو العلم، وهذا أمر مسلم يعلمه كل من قرأ القرآن والسنة النبوية المشرفة ودرس كتب علمائنا، فإن العلم سابق في كل شيء. ويكفي في الدلالة على ذلك قوله تعالى: فاعلم أنه لا إله إلا الله استغفر لذنبك وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. فقدم العلم وشرطه حتى في قضية الكبرى، قضية التوحيد، قضية الإيمان بالله تبارك وتعالى. وسنشرح هذا العلم وكيف تصوره الإمام أبو حامد الغزالي رحمه.
So in this initiative of the Imams, Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali, he aims to unite the inner sciences, the inner concerns of the Sufis with the outer and more academic or external concerns of the fuqaha. And of course this needs in order to proceed with this, we need to have a starting point. The name of the book, the name that he chose for this magnificent work of his, indicates what his objective was. Ihyaa Al-Uloom Al-Deen, reviving the sciences of the faith, of the religion. So what he attempts at through his discourses, through this work, is really to bring life back to not any one specific range of sciences, but all of the sciences pertaining to the deen. So he elaborates on and he throws and goes into detail in explaining in greater depth the established sciences of the deen, the usual concerns of many of the scholars when they're writing about areas of the deen, but also branches of Islamic knowledge and learning which for a long time have been neglected. And to revive all of these things is Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's aim. So it's a lofty target, it's a lofty aim. And the very first chapter that he begins with towards this end is Kitab al-Ilm, the book of knowledge. Before anything else, before he doesn't begin with Kitab al-Aqidah, Kitab al-Aqaid, discussing faith and the matters of belief or anything else, but he begins with the book of knowledge, really in order to establish that the foundation upon which this deen rests and upon which everything else is built and everything else proceeds from is knowledge before everything else. And it is well established through the Quran and the Sunnah and the disciplines of our religion that knowledge has to come before development in any of the other areas. And it's enough as an indicator for that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لِذَنْبِكَ. Allah says, know first that there is no God except Allah, and then seek forgiveness for yourself and for the believers. And so the knowledge is knowing that and ascertaining that as ilm is emphasized first and foremost, and that from that develops everything else. Our faith, the extent of our commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking forgiveness and seeking to achieve closeness to Him, all of that ensues from a firmly grounded state of knowledge. And so Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali begins then with his first book, the Book of Knowledge.
إحياء علوم الدين يكون بإحياء العلوم من الجهة النظرية وبإحيائها من الجهة التطبيقية العملية. فمن الجهة النظرية العلوم إما أن تكون علوما لتحقيق مصالح دنيوية أو علوما لتحقيق مصالح أخروية. وقد يخطر على البال أن تكون هناك قسمة ثالثة، علوم أخروية دنيوية. لا، ففي نظره أن العلوم الدنيوية الصالحة لا تكون إلا مساعدة لعلوم الآخرة، إلا طريقا إلى تحقيق علوم الآخرة. أما أن تستقل بنفسها فهذه ليست علوما دنيوية محمودة، ولهذا سيقسم العلم إلى محمود ومذموم، فيقسمه باعتبار آخر إلى علم مطلوب لذاته وعلم مطلوب لغيره، أي أنه مساعد لا يقصد لذاته هو. فهذه العلوم أبو حامد الغزالي رحمه الله سيبين رتبها فيما بينها، وهذا مهم جدا من الناحية النظرية، أي أن العلم ليس كله في رتبة واحدة. فإذا قلنا إن علوم الدنيوية هي علوم مساعدة، فعلوم الآخرة هي العلوم المقصودة لذاتها. وهذه العلوم، علوم الآخرة، هي مناط الإحياء والتجديد، لأن علوم الدنيوية هناك بواعث قوية من وضعية الاجتماعية للناس ومما طبعهم وجبلهم الله عز وجل عليه للعناية بها. الإنسان بطبعه لابد أن يأكل، بطبعه لابد أن ينام، بطبعه لابد، فهذه يعنى الناس بها وتتطور هذه العلوم لحاجة الناس إليها بطبعهم. أما علوم الآخرة فهي التي يحتاج فيها إلى وعي وإدراك وتيقظ ومراقبة وتنبيه وإشارة وهداية حتى يسلكها الناس ويجتهدوا في تحصيلها. هذه علوم الآخرة هي إذن مناط الإحياء. الإحياء يركز على إحياء علوم الآخرة، وهي عنده علوم الدين بالأساس والمقصودة في ذاتها.
So, the reviving of the Islamic sciences, Ihyaa Al-Uloom Al-Deen, is through, can take place at a theoretical level and at a practical level. There's the, conceptually, knowledge can relate to worldly affairs, worldly concerns, and empirical sciences, and then there are disciplines or branches of knowledge which relate wholly to man's spiritual needs, his relationship with his creator, the sciences of the other existence, al-ulum al-akhirah, of hereafter. Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali considers worldly knowledge a tool in order to aid and further one's objectives pertaining to the hereafter. In other words, worldly sciences are only as good as the extent to which they aid and further one's spiritual and otherworldly learning and concerns. Those are the concerns which are, and the knowledges, the sciences which are sought after in and of themselves. They're required in and of themselves. World disciplines and sciences are only beneficial so people do these things, but the concerns that relate to one's spiritual journey and that relate to one's afterlife are concerns which one needs guidance and direction towards in order to proceed on this road. So, and there's a need for, and this is why the religion, the deen, spends a lot of emphasis, or places a lot of emphasis on directing and educating and guiding and awakening man's awareness of his ultimate and greater purpose, of his hereafter, so that these become real concerns to us, just as the materialistic concerns of this world are already real concerns for us because we live in this material world. So in his Ihyaa Al-Uloom Al-Deen, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's concern is reviving the otherworldly and the spiritual sciences that relate to a person much more so than worldly concerns.
علوم الآخرة عند الغزالي رحمه الله تنقسم إلى قسمين. القسم الأول سماه علم المكاشفة، والقسم الثاني سماه علم المعاملة. وتركيزه في الإحياء إنما يتوجه إلى علم المعاملة لا إلى علم المكاشفة، فكأنه أخذ بعين الاعتبار الانتقادات التي لقيها من أصحابه كأبي بكر بن العربي وغيره، وركز على علم المعاملة الذي هو المحل المشترك بين علوم الفقهاء وعلوم الصوفية. أما علم المكاشفة فهو علم نظري لا مردود له من ناحية التطبيقية، وهو من علوم الصوفية الخاصة، لهذا لم يعرج عليه في الإحياء. ومقصوده بعلم المعاملة هي العلوم التي تؤسس للعمل، هي العلوم التي تنبني عليها أعمال الإنسان. فالفقهاء يعنون مثلا بالصلاة من جهة بيان شروط صحتها، شروط وجوبها. وأما الصوفية فيعنون بالصلاة نفس الأمر من جهة قبولها ونيل الثواب العظيم عند الله بأدائها، وكيف يخشع الإنسان فيها، وكيف يتدبر القرآن الذي يقرأه فيها، ولا يعرجون كثيرا على ظواهرها وهي ما يتعلق بالصحة وما إلى ذلك. فيأتي علم المعاملة الذي يقترحه الغزالي ليجمع بين الجهدين، بين العلمين، علم تصحيح العمل وعلم جعله مقبولا عند الله. فهذا هو علم المعاملة كما تصوره واجتهد في تطبيقه في كتابه إحياء علوم الدين رحمه الله.
So then the otherworldly concerns then, or the otherworldly sciences, the Ulum Al-Akhirah, that Imam Muhammad Al-Ghazali makes the focus of the Ihya, can be divided then into two categories. There's what he terms as the Ilm Al-Mukashafa, or the experiential Ulum Al-Mukashafa, the experiential sciences, and Ilm Al-Mu'amala, or the practical and sciences dealing with implementation and practice, and how to carry out these things. Now, again, within the Ulum Al-Akhirah, the otherworldly sciences, Imam Muhammad Al-Ghazali's concern is solely on the second category, that is the practical aspect of the otherworldly sciences and disciplines, and not so much the experiential things. The experiential Ulum al-Mukashafa deals with the things, is a purely Sufi domain where they speak about the states that a human being experiences as it draws closer to Allah, and the type of things that become manifest to him, and really talking about an otherworldly realm other than that which people can relate on a practical level. Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali wanted to concentrate not on those type of things, which really had no practical bearing on our duties as Muslims, on in carrying out our obligations and the injunctions of the Quran and the Sunnah. It doesn't. That really has no bearing on to what degree you experience otherworldly experiences. His focus was the Ulum al-Mu'amala, or the way in which to carry out Allah's injunctions in a refined spiritual state. You see, the Fuqaha and the Sufis both speak about Salah. Whilst the concern of the Fuqaha when they talk about Salah is things like the conditions, the prerequisite conditions for the validity of Salah, the things that are obligatory in prayer, the things that are forbidden to do during the prayer. And so they're talking about the do's and the don'ts and the qualifiers and the validators and these type of things. The Sufis also concern themselves with talking about Salah, but from the perspective of acceptability of your prayer as a spiritual act of worship before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're concerned much more than whether it's wajib to say this or it's makruh to do that, is the spiritual state of a human being when he does the prayers. Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali wanted to draw on this common denominator between the Sufis and the Fuqaha, which was the concern with the practice, and address both the validity of individual practices and individual actions and obligations and injunctions of our religion, the validity and the things that needed to be met in order for that to be acceptable, but also the spiritual outcomes and objectives and states that we should be aiming for through these exercises. So it was about rectifying and correcting action, but also making it acceptable with Allah. This was his stated target.
إذن علم أو علوم المكاشفة استبعدها الغزالي رحمه الله من مشروعه الإحيائي الذي هدف به إلى التوفيق بين الصوفية والفقهاء. وهذا الاستبعاد لعلم المكاشفة ليس لعدم قناعته بأهمية هذا العلم، وإنما لأمر آخر، وهو أنه يهدف إلى التوفيق بين هاتين الطائفتين وإيجاد الأرض المشتركة الصلبة التي ليس فيها نزاع وخصام بين المسلمين، لتكون هي قاعدة الإحياء. وأما علم المكاشفة فهو علم خاص بالصوفية لن يوافق عليه الآخرون ولن يقبلوا به ولأنه أيضا غير منضبط، فهو من المواهب الإلهية لبعض عباد الله الصالحين، فليس علما عاما يشترك فيه كل الناس حتى يدخله في مشروع الإحياء. إذن استبعاده لهذا العلم ليس كما قلت ناشئا من احتقار هذا العلم أو لجهله به أو ما إلى ذلك، وإنما لاعتبارات موضوعية ومنهجية.
Imam Al-Ghazali's the reason for his choosing not to dwell on the experiential states and to elaborate on the Sufi spiritual journeys and the phases of the spiritual journey that was chronicled by Sufi masters before him was not because he considered this unimportant or because he considered this irrelevant or thought little of these realities. No, but actually because he wished to remain confined with something that was practical and was shared commonly by the two disciplines of the fuqaha and the Sufis, something which is acceptable to all and which is a recognized target, a recognized goal for every Islamic, every seeker. Because a lot of the very specifically Sufi experiential states that they discuss are things which firstly may be contestable by other people, may not necessarily be agreed upon, may be a specifically Sufi sort of domain, but also because these things are, there's no way to measure how much or how little one is experiencing of these states, because it's from Allah's distribution. Allah gives somebody an experience in a prayer which he's been fortunate to receive from Allah, which not anybody else who's standing besides him praying that prayer is necessarily going to experience. And these are things which are given by Allah to individuals. Allah chooses, and there's really no way to regulate and codify as a science how this relates to human beings. So he didn't wish to concern himself with this for this reason, not because he considered it untrue or unimportant.
علم المعاملة إذن هو مدار التأليف، وهذا العلم يعرفه أبو حامد الغزالي رحمه الله بأنه اعتقاد وفعل وترك. اعتقاد ليبين أنه يشترك فيه الفقهاء وعلماء الكلام والصوفية، كل طوائف فهي تهتم بالعقيدة، وهو فعل أيضا لأنه يشترك فيه الفقهاء والصوفية لأنهم يعنون بالفعل، وهو أيضا ترك لأنه مشترك بينهما. فحصيلة الاعتقاد والفعل والترك هي علم المعاملة. فالإضافة التي يضيفها هنا أبو حامد الغزالي في جعله الاعتقاد والفعل والترك كلا لا يتجزأ، بعدما كانت كل طائفة تتناوله بمنأى عن الطوائف الأخرى، مقاربة العقيدة من طرف علماء الكلام غير مقاربة العقيدة من طرف الصوفية، وهكذا. فأبو حامد الغزالي يريد أن يقول إن علم المعاملة هو علم ينظر إلى العقيدة لا من جهة التخصص، وإنما من جهة كونها مؤسسة على الوحي القرآن والسنة. وإذا ما هو المفهوم الذي أراد كل واحد أن يجده؟ فالفقيه ينظر إليها من جهة، عالم الكلام من جهة، الصوفي من جهة أخرى. يقول لا ينبغي أن نجزئ العقيدة، لا ينبغي أن نجزئ الفعل، لا ينبغي أن نجزئ الترك. مثال حتى نوضح هذه الصورة. يقول يعني ونقلوا أنه سئل فقيه في من ترك الصلاة 5 أوقات، لم يصلي 5 أوقات، ما حكمه؟ فالفقيه يبقى تركها عمدا أو غير عمد. إن كان تركها عمدا ففيه قولان، قول بكفره وقول بأنه يقتل حدا لا كفرا وكذا. ثم سئل الصوفي عنها نفس المسألة، عن رجل ترك الصلاة 5 أوقات، ما كان جوابه؟ قال: هذا قلب ميت غفل عن الله. أين نظر غير نظر الفقيه؟ فأبو حامد الغزالي يقول: لا تعارض بين الإجابتين، وإنما ينبغي، وهذا هو علم المعاملة الذي يأتي به، أنه لا نفصل بالإجابة، لا يكون جوابنا فقهيا أو جوابنا صوفيا فقط، وإنما يكون مزجا بينهما، وهذا هو الإحياء علوم الدين، وسيطبقه في كل الأبواب والمباحث العلمية الشرعية، في الزكاة، في الصوم، في الحج، وهكذا. وقيمة إحياء علوم الدين ليست في اهتدائه إلى هذه الفكرة، إلى هذا المشروع فقط، وإنما في التفاصيل التطبيقية. إذا جاء يطبق على الأبواب، هنا تكمن قيمة إحياء علوم الدين. فهو لم يكتفي بأن يطلق الفكرة كما يفعل الآن كثير من الخطباء وكذا، ينبغي أن تفعلوا كذا وينبغي كذا والواجب علينا ولكن ماذا قدم؟ لا شيء. أبو حامد الغزالي بدأ بنفسه وكتب هذا الإحياء ليطبق هذه النظرية على كل الأبواب ويقترح حلولا.
Now, Imam Muhammad al-Ghazali defining ilm al-mu'amala then, which is what he's concerned with here, not ilm al-mukashaf, not the experiential aspects of the spiritual journey, but the practical elements. He defines this as being beliefs, practices, and abstention. It's the things that you have to believe in, the things that you have to do, and the things that you have to abstain from, stay away from, and not do. Beliefs, i'tiqad, are, this is an area which 3 of the major disciplines of the religion concern themselves with. The people of Aqidah and Ilm al-Kalam are concerned with how we believe and what we believe in, and how we what we believe regarding Allah and things like this. The people of Fiqh are also concerned with the state of belief and defining belief, and what defines a believer from a disbeliever, and what statements might take one outside of belief. And the people of Tasawwuf, the Sufis, are also concerned with belief as something that they are engaged with. However, each of these 3 approaches the issue of beliefs from a slightly different perspective. Fi'al and tark, the doing and the not doing, the do's and the don'ts of the deen, are also an area which the fuqaha, the people of fiqh, the practical sciences, and the Sufis, the people of the spiritual sciences, are both concerned with, again from slightly differing perspectives. What Abu Hamid al-Ghazali wishes to do is that he says that this is, in order, we need to be able to look at Aqidah, for example, or any of the practical elements, the actions, the things that we have to do, the things that we have to abstain from. We have to proceed towards these, not from any one specific perspective, just the perspective of the fuqaha, just the perspective of the mutakallimun, or just the perspective of the Sufis, but from one which is holistic and grounded in all of the concerns that derive from the Quran and the Sunnah. And therefore what he's trying to say is it's not correct that we differentiate between these different concerns, the spiritual concerns, the practical or the physical concerns, and the theoretical concerns when we're approaching any of these injunctions of our religion and our relationship with these. It should be a holistic concern for every single Muslim. For example, he says, if a man approaches a faqih and asks him the question, what do you say about somebody who leaves 5 prayers? He doesn't perform 5 prayers and he neglects them. What do you say about such a person? The faqih would ask that, well, did he leave those prayers deliberately or was it accidentally? And if it's deliberately, then there are 2 positions. One is that he's left the deen by discarding the prayer, a single prayer deliberately. He's left the deen, he's no longer a Muslim. If he's done it, and there's a second position which says he hasn't left the deen, but there's still capital punishment for deliberately discarding the prayers, and so he should be killed, not because he's become an apostate, but because of that being a crime which warrants capital punishment. And if he's done it accidentally and not deliberately, then there are different considerations. So he looks at it from this very, very practical and pragmatic perspective. The Sufi scholar, who's asked the very same question, what do you say about a man who's left 5 prayers, says this is a man whose heart is dead. For him to have been able to leave 5 prayers, his heart is clearly disconnected with consciousness of his Creator. A very different perspective that he's looking at the same issue from. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali's objective really is that both of those are equally important to maintain at the same time, simultaneously. That you consider the practical implications and the shari'i, physical or actual rulings and the ahkam, but also the spiritual impact and concerns that accompany all of these things. And this is the true approach of the deen as a holistic whole from the Quran and the Sunnah. So what he's saying is we shouldn't differentiate. There should not be this differentiation between the different approaches as though they're separate domains for separate groups of people. If you're concerned with fiqh, you only look at this aspect. If you're concerned with spirituality and tasawwuf, then it's only this type of thing that you look at. It shouldn't be like that. But every single Muslim should approach these things from a holistic. And he says, the Shaykh says, the real value of the Ihyaa is not simply in suggesting that all of this needs to be combined together, the tatbiq. There needs to be a sort of unification between practical and spiritual concerns. But its real value is that he lays out in every one of the chapters that he discusses exactly how this unification can be achieved. So when he's discussing Kitab al-Hajj, Kitab al-Zakat, Kitab al-Sawm, the chapters of fasting, of giving zakat, of making hajj, in all of these things he covers both the practical and the spiritual concerns. The practical from a very evidence-based and textual perspective, and the spiritual concerns from examining what the objectives of these actions are and the spiritual statements to be accompanying these, and how to tie those together, how to marry those together at each and every single step. So that is the real value of Al-Ghazali's Ihyaa.
علم المعاملة هذا قلنا أنه يؤسس للعمل، والعمل قسمان بحسب تعلقه. فهناك أعمال تتعلق بالجوارح، وهناك أعمال أخرى تتعلق بالقلوب. وأعمال القلوب أهم في نظر الشارع من أعمال الجوارح. ويكفي في الدلالة على ذلك أن الإيمان والكفر محلهما القلب، هما من أعمال القلب، وأن النية من أعمال القلب، وأن الحسد من أعمال القلب، وأن العجب من أعمال القلب. فهذا واضح. وأعمال الجوارح هي التي يدرسها علم المعاملة في شقه الظاهر. علم الظاهر يعنى بأعمال الجوارح، وعلم الباطن يعنى بأعمال القلوب. فهذا التقسيم كان معروفا وسائدا، إلا أن إضافة أبي حامد الغزالي هو أنه لم ينظر إلى أعمال الجوارح أنها من علم الظاهر فقط، بل سيقحم علم الباطن ويطبقه على أعمال الجوارح، وسيقحم علم الظاهر في أعمال القلوب، فلن تكون خاصة بعلم الباطن. فلن يكون همه فقط كما يفعل علماء الباطن كيف يكون الإنسان معجبا بنفسه، ولماذا يصير هذا الإنسان معجبا بنفسه. لا، هو أيضا سيتكلم عن حكم العجب بالنفس، وأنه حرام، وأن هذا ينبغي أن يبحث وأن يدرس في الفقه، لا أنه إذا ولهذا سيقول أن علم المعاملة هو فرض عين على كل مسلم تعلمه، ويسمي هذا الانشغال به والإجابة عن مسائله بفتوى الآخرة. نقول هناك فتوى الدنيا وهناك فتوى الآخرة، هذا الحكم عند أبي حامد الغزالي هو فرض عين، هكذا يقول عبارته، فرض عين في فتوى الآخرة، وعلم المعاملة فرض عين على كل مسلم في فتوى الآخرة. إذن هناك توفيق وتناغم بين الظاهر والباطن، ويرفض هذه التجزئة وهذا التقسيم بين العلمين. وهذا كما قلت هو شغله الشاغل في إحياء علوم الدين. وبعد ذلك يقول أن هذا العمل بقسميه، أعمال الجوارح وأعمال القلوب، هو في الحقيقة إما عادة وإما عبادة وإما صفة خلقية مهلكة وإما صفة خلقية منجية. وعليه سيقسم كتابه إحياء علوم الدين إلى هذه الأبواب: العبادات والعادات والمهلكات، ويختم بالمنجيات. فإن العبادات والعادات هي من أعمال الجوارح، وأما الصفات الخلقية المهلكة والصفات الخلقية المنجية فهي من أعمال القلوب. وعليه جمع لنا أعمال الجوارح وأعمال القلوب في إحيائه ضمن مشروعه الذي طبق عليه علم المعاملة.
So the science of mu'amala, or the science of the practical implementation, the merging of both of these things, and the way to deal with Allah's injunctions and ahkam. Imam al-Ghazali says this is the foundation for action. And action can be divided into two types depending on what it relates to. There's the action of the limbs, of the hands and the feet and the body parts, and that's the those are physical actions. And then there are the actions that relate to the heart, and those are also actions. Those are also concerns. Indeed, from the viewpoint of the Sharia, the actions of the heart are much more important and much more have a much greater impact than the actions of the hands and feet, the actions of the body parts. And it's enough just to consider that the difference between kufr and iman, that faith and disbelief, that the intention and sincerity in good deeds, that arrogance and pride, that jealousy, and all of these other concerns are issues which relate to the heart. And these are the most fundamental and most significant of the actions of a human being in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the practical things that a person does or doesn't do, although of course they're important, much more weighty in the eyes of Allah is the state of the heart that accompanies these things. And therefore these two types of actions, the physical actions that deal with the body parts, and the actions that deal with the heart, or the states of the heart, have been differentiated into ilm al-zahir, the science of the outer, and ilm al-batin, or the science of the inner. And this was happening a long time before Al-Ghazali. This distinction was recognized and acknowledged. And again, the fuqaha concern themselves mainly with the zahir, and the people of tasawwuf concern themselves mainly with the batin. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, his contribution is that he contends that the outer, or the things that are done by the body parts, aren't solely outer elements, that they also have a batin element to them. Even the things that are carried out by the limbs, by the hands and the feet, the physical actions of a person aren't solely outer aspects which only the fuqaha need to concern themselves with. And the inner states of a person aren't solely, or the actions of the heart aren't solely the concern or the realm of the inner states, but that also has a bearing and a direct impact on his actions. And so again, this understanding of the marrying of the two states, the two parts of the human being. He then therefore says, ilm al-mu'amala, knowledge of how to combine both of these and how to carry out one's duties physically and spiritually in a combined way. This is a fard ayn, and an individually binding obligation upon every single believer. And he says to be concerned and preoccupied with this is an obligation by not necessarily worldly fatwas, but otherworldly fatwas. In other words, there are fatwa which relate to things of this world. It's halal to eat something and haram to eat something else, for example. But then there are the fatwa which relate to the hereafter, and he says you are obliged by your Creator, and you will be made accountable by Allah for not being concerned with learning about how to combine between the inner and the outer, and to make both of these your objective when you're worshipping Allah. So that's an obligation, a fatwa, which relates more to your hereafter. And again, the merging between the outer and the inner, Al-Ghazali rejects that there is a distinction between the two of these, and that they're separate entities which exist independent of each other. In truth, for an action to be a true action, it has to be correct outwardly, and it has to be sound inwardly. And he therefore says, every one of a person's actions, whether they're actions done physically or actions pertaining to the heart, are either done out of habit or done as an act of worship, or they are a part of a person's character. Some things are a part of a person's character, and character then also can be either destructive character or character which can give one salvation. So character, there are good qualities that people have, and then there are bad qualities which people have. So every single action is either done as out of habit, or it's done as an act of worship, or it's done because it's a part of one's character, and that's either a positive character trait or it's a negative character trait. Therefore, he divides Ihyaa Al-Uloom into these four parts: al-ibadat, acts of worship; al-adat, things done out of habit or practices and norms which are observed; and then also al-muhlikat, the destructive qualities which bring about a person's downfall; and al-munjiyat, the saving qualities, saving graces, through which salvation can be earned. So these are the four areas of Ihyaa Al-Uloom Al-Deen. The first two, ibadat and adat, worship and practices, relate to the physical actions, a'mal al-jawarih, and the destructive characteristics and qualities, and the salvaging characteristics and qualities relate to the states of the heart.
هذه هي الفكرة الأساسية لمشروع إحياء علوم الدين عند الإمام أبي حامد الغزالي. وحاجتنا إلى هذه الفكرة الأساسية اليوم كما كانت الحاجة إليها في وقته، بل لعل في يومنا هذا، وقتنا هذا، الحاجة إلى بعث الإحياء من جديد أمر آكد. فإن المسلمين اليوم وغير المسلمين أيضا يحتاجون إلى أن يوجهوا بهذا العلم الذي سماه الغزالي علم المعاناة. ففي المسلمين اليوم من ينظر إلى الإسلام نظرة سطحية، نظرة الظاهر فقط، ولا يعنى بشيء من باطنه. ولا يزال هناك من يريد أن يفصل باطن الإسلام عن أحكامه الشرعية الظاهرة ويتفلت عنها من مدعي التصوف. وهناك خطر أعظم من هاتين الطائفتين اليوم يعرف في بلاد المسلمين ويعرف في العالم، وهو ذاك التوجه إلى إقصاء الدين عن الحياة، فصل الدين عن الحياة، وأن لا أزمة روحية كادت أن يعني تبعده تماما عن الصواب وعن طريق الحق. فترك المدرسة عام 488 وخرج من بغداد إلى حج بيت الله الحرام. وأخوه أحمد كان دائما معه، لم يبلغ مبلغه في العلم، ولكنه كان من أهل العلم، وغلب عليه التوجه الصوفي السلوكي، ولكن كان دائما إلى جنبه. وعندما أراد أن يذهب إلى الحج استخلف واستناب أخاه أحمد في المدرسة النظامية ليعطي الدروس بدلا. وكان المنتظر أنه بعد الحج يرجع إلى المدرسة النظامية ليتم دراسة التدريس، لكنه لم يفعل وبدأ في رحلة أخرى.
During the third period of the Imam's life, which was the period of his self-doubt, the period of shak, and within this period, it's a very short period of only 2 years, between the ages of his age of 38 and 40. And during this period, Imam Ghazali went through both an intellectual and a spiritual crisis, in which he doubted everything which he had learned previously. Everything which he had learned previously, to their veracity, to their legitimacy. And he went through this period. He went through this period with these doubts lingering within himself. And in order to remove these doubts and this crisis he was going through, he felt it was necessary for him to leave the madrasa and to leave the madrasa and to travel in order for him to remove these doubts. So in 488 after Hijri, he left his madrasa and made it clear to people around him that he was going for Hajj. He was going for Hajj. During this period of Imam Ghazali's development, we shouldn't forget that his brother Ahmad was also together with him. Although Ahmad was more inclined towards practicing Islam, more worship-based, but nonetheless he was also a scholar and also sought knowledge. Now when Imam Ghazali went for Hajj, the responsibility or his responsibility for teaching was handed over to his brother, and his brother continued the circles of Imam Ghazali in his absence. Everybody expected Imam Ghazali to return after he completed the Hajj, to return back to his teaching post in the madrasa, but he did not do this, and he continued on his travels.
بعد الحج لم يريد العودة إلى بغداد، وإنما اتجه وقصد دمشق عام 89 و400 من الهجرة، وأقام بها بعض الأيام، ثم توجه منها إلى بيت المقدس فلسطين حرمها الله، فجاور فيه مدة، وبدأ بتأليف كتابه إحياء علوم الدين. إذن بدء تأليف كتاب إحياء علوم الدين ببيت المقدس، ثم عاد إلى دمشق واعتكف بالمنارة الغربية من الجامع الأموي، وبها كانت إقامته، يصعد إليها طوال النهار ويغلق بابها على نفسه، وإلى اليوم تعرف هذه الزاوية بالغزالية نسبة إليه، وفي دمشق تم كتابه الإحياء.
Following the Hajj, Imam Ghazali continued on to Damascus, in the year 489 after Hijri. And spending some time in Damascus, he continued on to Jerusalem, to Quds, to Palestine. And it was actually in Quds, in Jerusalem itself, where Imam Ghazali started the writing of his most famous book, the Ihyaa Al-Uloom Al-Deen, the rejuvenation of religious sciences, and he started his writing in Quds itself. He continued from Quds, returning back to Damascus, and within the Umayyad Mosque, which is in central Damascus, the Umayyad Mosque in central Damascus, there was a minaret or a place where that was called on the west of the west of the masjid. And it was within that minaret which Imam Ghazali used to ascend and lock himself in and continue writing and his understanding of the Ihyaa Al-Uloom Al-Deen. And if anybody visits that place now, the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, it's now known as Darul Ghazali, the corner or the spiritual hospice, you could also say, of Imam Al-Ghazali.
في عام 90 والغزالي قد بلغ 40 من عمره، يمر ببغداد مرة أخرى، لكن لا يقصدها هي، وإنما كان يقصد خراسان. ويجتمع به في بغداد تلميذه أبو بكر بن العربي المالكي رحمه الله. وأبو بكر بن العربي ينقل في العواصم، كتاب العواصم، نبأ التحول الذي لاحظه على شيخه، وأنه قد دخل في ترهات الصوفية واختل عقله أو شيء من هذا القبيل. وكنا نأمل يعني أن يحافظ على منطقه وعقله ورزانته، إلا أنه بدخوله في التصوف يعني أصيب بمرض عقلي. هكذا كان زبدة كلام أبو بكر بن العربي في توصيف تلك المرحلة الخطيرة من حياة أبي حامد الغزالي. ينزل في بغداد برباط أبي سعيد النيسابوري، وهذا الرباط كان مواجه للمدرسة النظامية في بغداد، ولكنه لم يشأ أن يستأنف التدريس في النظامية، مع أنه كان في إقامته قد نزل بهذا الرباط. لم يقم طويلا ببغداد، بل سافر منها إلى خراسان.
So in 490 after Hijri, Imam Ghazali had now reached the age of 40. He returned back to Baghdad. Although going to Baghdad, his intention was not to remain there. His intention was to continue from there onto Khorasan. And while he was there in Baghdad, his intention to continue on to Khorasan, he met one of his most famous students, who we mentioned previously, Abu Bakr ibn Arabi al-Maliki. And Abu Bakr ibn Arabi al-Maliki met Imam Ghazali, and in his famous book Al-Arasim, in his famous book, he perceived a change within Imam Ghazali. He perceived a change within Imam Ghazali, and Imam Abu Bakr ibn Arabi al-Maliki mentioned that Imam Ghazali had somehow entered into the excesses of the people of Tasawwuf, and the excesses of the people of Sufism. And he said that he feared for Imam Ghazali and said that some part of madness may have overtaken him. And he describes him as such in this book which is mentioned, Al-Asim, and he says that he felt that Imam Ghazali had now got to the extremes of his relationship with the people of Sufi, of Tasawwuf, and that this had had an adverse effect on his intelligence and also on his intellect, and that he now felt that there was little benefit which he could now take from him in this particular state. Imam Ghazali getting to Baghdad he didn't actually go back to the Madrasa al-Imamiyya. You know, the ribat or a madrasa stroke spiritual hospital across there, which was run by Abu Sa'id and Nisaburi, and this was actually opposite the madrasa of the Nizamiyya. Even though it was such a close distance, he had no intention to return back to the madrasa of Nizamiyya, rather he stayed at this particular spiritual hospital stroke madrasa, ribat, of Abu Sa'id and Nisaburi, and from thereafter he left Baghdad and made his way on to خراسان.
بعض الكتاب المؤلفين يقولون أنه من بغداد لم يتوجه إلى خراسان، وإنما ذهب مرة ثانية إلى الحج، ثم منه إلى خراسان. المهم أن أبا حامد الغزالي رحمه الله في كتابه المنقذ من الضلال يؤكد أن فترة الشرك لم تتجاوز 6 أشهر، يعني ضمن هذه السنتين أزمته لم تتجاوز 6 أشهر. والذي نلحظه على هذه الفترة هو كثرة سفره وعدم استقراره، يعني في 2 سافر ما لم يسافره من قبل.
Some of the authors and researchers into the life of Ghazali also mentioned that he didn't actually go to Khorasan directly. Rather, from Baghdad he went on for Hajj in the next year, and thereafter completed his journey on to Khorasan. During this period, his book Munqidh min al-Dalal, his deliverance from error, or deliverance from misguidance, is authored. And within this book he mentions the fact that the actual total period of his period of spiritual crisis, stroke intellectual crisis, didn't actually surpass 6 months. It didn't actually surpass 6 months, rather it was a period of 6 months. What this particular period is marked by are the many travels and the many journeys and the many rihalat, spiritual travels and others which he took place during this time, this 2-year period of his total crisis which you mentioned. Now, what is to bear in mind is the fact that he made up in these 2 years in terms of traveling what he had not done for the rest of his life. Basically, these 2 years of his life, we went through his crisis. He traveled more than he had traveled for the whole period of his life put together previously.
بعد 40 إذن استقر أبو حامد الغزالي رحمه الله في خراسان، وعاد مرة أخرى إلى التدريس في خراسان، ودرس مدة من الزمن، ثم قرر ترك التدريس والتعليم والمناظرة والجدل العلمي، واشتغل حوالي 10 سنوات حداد نفسه. تعرفون أن صانع السيوف يأخذ الحديد ثم يصهره في النار، وهذه الصناعة تسمى بالحدادة. يقولون فلان حداد نفسه، أي هو الذي سيصهرها ويروضها حتى تسير على ما يريد وعلى وفق مبتغاه. فهذه 10 سنوات هي الفترة الزمنية التي سيخضع الغزالي فيها نفسه لما تمخض لديه من علم وحكمة وتجربة ليصنع النفس والإنسان الذي يأمله. إذن هذا التشكيل سيكون حسب نظريته لما ينبغي أن يكون عليه المسلم من خلال فهمه بعد 40 سنة إذن فهمه للقرآن والسنة النبوية المشرفة.
At 40, Imam al-Ghazali remained in Khorasan, as we mentioned, and he returned to teaching in Khorasan. But this period of his teaching didn't continue for long, and which included him teaching fiqh and debates and Islamic beliefs and all the other topics. This period of his teaching in Khorasan didn't remain for long. He decided after this period to leave teaching totally. Now the next 10 years of his life, Imam al-Ghazali turned his attention and his efforts and his perception to himself, turned it inwards towards himself. And he became, as we say, a blacksmith of himself. A blacksmith of himself. That is, in the same way the blacksmith creates and forges swords, forges other metals, he turned to his own self, attempted to forge himself into the model Muslim, into the model Muslim, the Muslim which Allah Azza wa Jal and His Prophet would expect from his followers. And these 10 years he worked upon himself in using spiritual exercises and other such things. And he became a person in which, if a person wants to see him, he would consider that person to be a model Muslim. And this was the collection or the totality of the person of Imam Ghazali's intellectual and spiritual combination, conclusion after 40 years of study and 40 years of his experiences of meeting and discussing with other scholars and people, and also the period of his wandering the land of Hijaz and of Damascus and of Jerusalem. So he turned inwards towards himself after 40 years. And for the 10 years of that period, he attempted to shape himself and reform himself into a model Muslim.
إذن ما هي خلاصة 40 سنة التي سيجعلها مشروع 10 سنوات؟ الخلاصة هو أن العلم الحقيقي ليس تلك المعلومات التي نجمعها، وإنما العلم الحقيقي هو النور الذي ينشأ في قلب المؤمن من خلال مجاهدته لنفسه ورياضتها والإكثار من ذكر الله عز وجل وفعل ما يقرب العبد من الله. وهذا النور هو الذي يعطي اليقين والاستقرار ووضوح الرؤية، ويفرق به صاحبه بين المتشابهات، بين الحق والباطل وما إلى ذلك. فهذه الخلاصة إذن سيبدأ في تحويلها إلى برنامج تطبيقي عملي 10 سنوات ليصفي 40 سنة. محصول 40 سنة سيصفيه بهذه الطريقة، فينشأ كثمرة نور في قلبه يميز به المعلومات بعضها من بعض. فهذا هو مشروعه في هذه العشرية، وحدث عنه في المنقذ من الضلال فقال رحمه الله: دمت على ذلك، أي على الخلوة وتصفية القلب لذكر الله تعالى، مقدار 10 سنين. وانكشف لي في أثناء هذه الخلوات أمور لا يمكن إحصاؤها واستقصاؤها، والقدر الذي أذكره لينتفع به أني علمت يقينا أن الصوفية هم السابقون، فإن جميع حركاتهم وسكناتهم في ظاهرهم وباطنهم مقتبسة من نور مشكاة النبوة، وليس وراء نور النبوة على وجه الأرض نور يستضاء. إذن وصل إلى أن المنهج الصواب الذي ينبغي أن يتبع هو ما كان عليه الصوفية المحققون من اعتناء بالتمسك بظاهر الشريعة كما بباطنها، لا ينفك ظاهرهم عن باطنهم، لا تنفك حركاتهم عن سكناتهم، هم في كل الأحوال متمسكون ب ما سماه مشكاة النبوة، هذا المصباح الذي تركه النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، والذي فيه العلم والعمل والحال، العلم والعمل والحال، فهذا هو ميراث الأنبياء، فليس العلم وحده كافيا، ولا العمل وحده كافيا، ولا الحال وحدها كافية، وإنما لابد من العلم والعمل والحال. مثلا العلم هو أن تعلم أن الصلاة واجبة وأن عليك إقامتها. العمل هو أن تشرع في أدائها. والحال هو تلك المشاعر والأحاسيس التي تملأ كيانك الداخلي وباطنك حين تكون مؤديا للصلاة. ماذا كان يستشعر ويحس الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو يصلي؟ هل هذا ضاع؟ لا، لابد أن يحفظ وأن ينتقل من جيل إلى جيل، وهو جزء من ميراث النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم.
So, this 40 years of Imam Ghazali's experience and his studies, what was the khulasa, what was the summary, conclusion of this 40 years? Imam Ghazali came to the conclusion, which he himself mentions in his Deliverance from Error, when he says that ilm is not ma'lumat, or ilm is not just knowing things. Knowledge is not just knowing things. Rather, knowledge is a divine light. Divine light. And the knowledge, reality of knowledge, or real knowledge, is knowledge which has aspects of striving. A person strives to purify himself. A person increases in the remembrance of Allah. A person increases his desire to have taqarrub, to have proximity to his Creator. A person increases in his love for the Prophet. A person increases for his love for the people of piety, of the Sulaha. And a person practicing upon these things will actually give him true yaqeen, true belief and steadfastness in his belief. And all things will become clear to him. All things will become clear to him. In that, if there are mutashabihat, things which are in doubt in the judgment, depending on a person's practicing of what we just mentioned previously, things will become clear to him. Depending on a person's practicing what we mentioned previously, things which are halal and haram will also become clear. the things between falsehood and righteousness will also become clear. And this is the program which Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah himself applied himself to. Applied himself to, and he spent this, he mentioned 10 years in solitude. 10 years in solitude in order for this program to be enacted upon his life and have an impact upon his life. And he mentions that during this time he came across certain spiritual states which is not possible for him to put into words nor to mention. And he said that the people of tazkiyah, people of purity, of tasawwuf, they are the people that their sayings and their actions come from the torch, or from the light, or from the essence of prophethood, That is, following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ has two aspects: the external and the internal. And that all their actions and all their movements and their silences, the harakat and sakanat, all of these are from the light of the Prophet, the light of the divine revelation. And that from the mishkat, the nabuwah, from the light or the torch of the Prophet, it is that there is ilm, there is knowledge, and there is amal, and there is action, and there is hal or states. And this is in reality the inheritance of the prophets, that is knowledge, action, and spiritual states. So a person needs all three in order to become a perfect or complete believer. And we can give an example of salah, for example. Everybody knows that salah is wajib. Everybody knows that salah is wajib and compulsory. And to establish prayer is from the a'mal. To establish prayer is from the actions. But thereafter, after one establishes the prayer in terms of acting, what about the spiritual states of one's prayer? Does he have a feeling of who he is standing in front of? Does he have a feeling of what he is reciting in terms of what he is proclaiming in front of his Lord? So all of these things are from the light of the Prophet, and all these three aspects have to be put into one's life. And all of these are from the aspects, or from the part of the miraq and the inheritance of our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
إذن هذه المرحلة الرابعة التي بدأت من سن 40 لعل أهم صفة فيها هو اعتزاله السياسة، ابتعاده عن المشاكل والأزمات الاجتماعية والسياسية التي كانت مستمرة ولم تتوقف ولن تتوقف. وتنقل بعض المصادر أنه في سنة لما بلغ 48 سنة رجع إلى التدريس في نظامية نيسابور بطلب من وزيرها فخر الملك. وهذا الوزير كان مصيره للأسف الشديد مثل وزير نظام الملك، إذ قتل أيضا ولعله بعد قتله كان توقف الغزالي عن التدريس. فبعد هذا التوقف رجع إلى بيته واتخذ في جواره مدرسة للفقهاء وخنقاه للصوفية يتعبدون فيها، ووزع أوقاته على وظائف الحاضرين من ختم القرآن الكريم، يعني بقي يقرأ القرآن كلما ختم أعاد قراءته وهكذا، ومجالسة ذوي القلوب، الجلوس مع الذين يتكلمون في الرقائق والزهديات وإصلاح النفوس، وإلى أن لقي الله بقي على هذا يعني فترته الأخيرة. وفي طوس يوم الاثنين 14 جماد الآخرة سنة 500 رحل الغزالي رحمه الله عن عالم الدنيا ببدنه، وظل بعلمه فارسا وصاحب مدرسة في الإسلام مفتوحة لكل العصور. وينقل الإمام السبكي رحمه الله في طبقات الشافعية عن ابن الجوزي في كتاب الثبات عند الممات خبر موت الغزالي كما حدث أخوه أحمد نقل خبر وفاته فقال: لما كان يوم الاثنين وقت الصبح توضأ أخي أبو حامد وصلى وقال: علي بالكفن، يعني جيبوني بالكفن. فأخذه وقبله ووضعه على عينيه وقال: سمعا وطاعة للدخول على الملك الله سبحانه وتعالى. ثم مد رجليه واستقبل القبلة ومات قبل الإسفار، قدس الله روحه.
This last period of Imam Ghazali is actually the fourth period. This period is specified by the fact that the Imam himself distanced himself from the problems, the political mechanics and political problems taking place, and from the problems that were occurring with the rulers and so forth. So he distanced himself from the ruling circle and class, and took his time to himself. And at the age of 48, it's mentioned that actually the Imam on the whole of Fakhr al-Mulk did actually return back to Nizamiya for a short period to teach. But with great regret, he also, Fakhr al-Mulk, met the same fate as first person, Nizam al-Mulk, that he was also killed by, assassinated by the Batiniya. Following this, Imam Ghazali saw no reason to return or remain in the Nizamiya. He returned back to his home town of Dus, and he established his time in worship, and also took residence close to a local madrasa which he established, and a khanqa, which was a hospital for hospice. And he spent most of his time in a few activities of placing proximity to Allah, such as the khatam of the Quran. He would consistently read the Quran, and when he finished, he would restart it and continue as such. And also in sitting with the people, the people who would bring wisdom and exhortation in order for the person's heart to become softened, and in order for a person's heart to become inclined towards the hereafter. And on the 14th of Jama'at Imam Ghazali rahimahullah passed away in Tus on the year of 505 after Hijri. Now, when he passed away, Ibn Jawzi mentions Thibat al-Mamat in one of his books, steadfastness with when death, steadfast when death occurs, or in the presence of death. He says, he narrates from Imam Ghazali's own brother Ahmad. He says that when the day of Yawm al-Ithnain came, which is a Monday, Imam Ghazali performed wudu, performed two rakats, two units of prayer. And then he said to his brother, "Come to me with my kafan. Come to me with my kafan." And then he also said, "Welcome to our guests who have entered upon us," meaning the angels. And before the time of Isfar, before the time of when the sun starts to set, just before the time of period of time before Maghrib, he passed on to the mercy of Allah. And he left behind him a madrasa. A madrasa, not a physical madrasa, not a physical place, but a madrasa, a thought or an understanding of the deen, which is still open and still a dominant understanding and still practiced upon by the vast majority of the Muslims. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Continuing from where we stopped, we spoke about the life of Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. So we're going to open the floor up to questions on the first section, inshallah. Following that, we're going to carry on to the section of, or the bab of knowledge of ilm. So at this moment, any questions regarding the first section of this particular being intensive? If the sisters upstairs want to ask questions, please plug in the microphone which is in front of them under the screen. The microphone is on the side. Just plug that in and turn it on and just ask the question, inshallah. Any questions?
Where can we find in our present time means of tazkiyat al-nafs, and also should we look for turuq or should we look for manahij rather than turuq Sufiya, for instance?
The question is from the brother is in our present times where can we look to for sources of tazkiyah, of internal purification? Should we look towards principles, manahij, or should we look towards Sufiya, the paths of Sufism, or should we look towards individuals?
والتصوف علم كسائر العلوم، دخله الدخل كما دخل علوما أخرى. ووظيفة العلماء قديما وحديثا هي تنقيته مما علق وظيفة العلماء قديما وحديثا هي تنقية هذه العلوم مما علق بها من الدخل. لكن تزكية النفس وتطهيرها غير تنقية وتطهير العلم من ما داخله، فلا يكون الإنسان مزكى النفس بمجرد ما يقرأ ويحصل علما ولو كان هذا العلم أنقى العلوم. فلا يخطئن أحد بظنه الاكتفاء بالكتاب عن المنهج التربوي الذي يلقن عن طريق القدوات، عن طريق الأسوة الحسنة، عن طريق الصحبة الصالحة. هذا هو المنهج الذي يسلك لتحقيق تزكية النفس. أما إنسان يجلس في مكتب ويقرأ الكتب، ولو قرأ إحياء علوم الدين وقرأ قتل القلوب وقرأ يعني كل الكتب التي تتكلم في ما زكت نفسه أبدا، أعطيه معنى نظري يعني جيد، ولكن لا يكفي. ليس بهذا يكون الإنسان تقيا ورعا وصالحا. يعني قال ابن عطاء الله: لا يعوزك أو وجود الدالين على الله، إنما يعوزك صدق الطلب، فأصدق في الطلب تجده. يعني الله سبحانه وتعالى جعل لهذا الدين في كل عصر وفي كل مكان من يقوم بالحجة لله، وعليك أنت أن تبحث وتفتش بصدق. وكان الصحابة رضوان الله عليهم أجمعين يعني يرحلون للاستفادة من بعضهم البعض، والرحلة في طلب العلم من وظائفها تزكية النفس واللقاء بالعلماء الربانيين الصالحين. والعبرة أيضا ليست بالكثرة، وإنما بحصول النفع ولو للحظة. ممكن تلتقي بعالم صالح في مجلس ينفعك الله ما لم ينفعك بمجالسة يعني سنين، فهذا هو الفتح. وكما قالوا من علامات المقت حرمان بركة أهل الوقت. الله السلام.
Shaykh mentioned initially the knowledge of tazkiyah, the knowledge of tazkiyah, and the author and the reason why the books were authored was to protect that knowledge from erroneous elements entering within it. But those books themselves were not written in order for people to seek their tazkiyah through those books. So those books were there to stop the erroneous elements entering into the science, but in itself the books were not authored in order for a person to gain his suluk or his spiritual progress through those books. So there's no iktifa, or there's no relying solely upon the works of the previous scholars and masters of the science. The only way in which a person will gain spiritual closeness to Allah and spirituality is through a qudwa, or a guide, or a person with which he can benefit from in person, And This can come in many guises. It can come through the sohbah of the sulaha, the company of the pious. It can come through the company of also an individual. And it can come through also the company of pious friends also. So the vital element of suluk is the accompaniment of somebody who has that state, and even though if a person was to read Ihyaa Al-Uloom Al-Deen from beginning to end 1,000 times, the Shaykh mentioned, a person would not necessarily change spiritually. Rather, spirituality will occur in a person and come through a person through sohbah, through spending company with somebody else who has that state. The brother asking the question added a point where, how can a person find such people? To which the Shaykh replied, a person has to have sidq in the talab, a person has to have sincerity and honesty in his search for that person or people who can guide him. And if a person has sidq in that, then he will find that. He will find that. And he mentioned some words of wisdom from Ihyaa Al-Iskandari. He mentioned some words of wisdom from Ihyaa Al-Iskandari. He said that every time there will be people who will guide you to Allah. In every time there will be people who will guide you to Allah. And if you look back to the times of the companions themselves used to give good advice to each other and take each other to Allah. Okay, so when a person seeks such a person, sees such a person or searches for such a person, if he has sincerity and truthful intention, then he will find that person. And Shaykh also mentioned the fact that from the signs of a person being deprived from the mercy of Allah is that he doesn't take benefit from the people of that time. The people of that time. So each person has to seek and to upon Allah for the person to be guided to him. Are there any other questions? Any questions from the sisters upstairs?
You said earlier in your introduction, Shaykh, about he went to, instead of going back to the madrasa, he went to a spiritual hospital or something like that. Do you still get things like that? So, can you elaborate on that?
Well, this question was during our discussion on the life of Imam Ghazali. You mentioned that after he returned back from the Nizamiya, he returned back to a spiritual hospital or to a khanqa. So the brother's question: do such places still exist? And if so, where?
ليس عندنا يعني علما عن هذه الخنقاء التي كان اتخذها الغزالي رحمه الله، ولا نعرف أين بيته حقيقة وغيره. التفاصيل ظهرت مع التاريخ فيما أعلمه عنه. طبعا المدارس الشرعية ما يسمونه المدارس القرآنية، هذه من من الأماكن التي يتربى فيها الإنسان على القرآن وعلى الصلاة وعلى ذكر الله وعلى مجالسة الصالحين والعلماء. تختلف طبعا نوعيتها باختلاف أيضا من يقوم عليها. لا شك المدرسة التي يقوم عليها علماء غير التي يقوم عليها طلبة علم متوسطون وهكذا.
The question I should reply to was, first of all, initially the particular khanqa which spoke about Imam Ghazali, also maybe even the home of Imam Ghazali. We absolutely know the absolute certainty where that is. So all the people have different positions of where that particular house of Imam Ghazali or his khanqa may be. Nobody knows exactly where it is. The second part of the question was, where are organizations or places similar to that, the spiritual hospitals? The Shaykh replied that, for example, madrasas or Quran schools, and these are also the places where spiritual reformation takes place, and these are also the places where recitation of Quran and afkar and these type of things takes place. So depending on the quality of the person who's overlooking these particular institutes, the madrasa will reflect that. So these institutes are still alive. The person needs to look for ones that is suitable for himself.
Sheikh, I just want to clarify my notes. When Imam Ghazali went on his retreat, did he go by himself or did he go with his brother Ahmed?
So the question of the brother is, when Imam Ghazali went on his retreat, was he accompanied by his brother or did he go by himself?
نعم كان معه.
الشيخ mentioned that
إلا مش دائما ولكن في الغالب كان معه. مثلا لما ذهب إلى الحج قلنا استنابه في التدريس، لم يكن معه. نعم لم يكن معه كل الأحوال.
He said although he was with him in terms of when he was studying when he went for his spiritual retreat, he was not with him. Are there any questions from the sisters from upstairs? You can either write them down or send them down, or you want to use a microphone, so you can also do that.
قلنا أن الإمام الحامد الغزالي رحمه الله عاش في فترة اضطرابات سياسية واجتماعية، وأيضا كان هناك في زمانه نزاع بين طائفتين كبيرتين من المشتغلين بالعلم وبالدعوة الإسلامية